Okay, so today what we're going to talk about now is production, output, and cost. So we're going to look at production in the short run and the long run. So let's look at the definitions of the short run and the long run first. This is production, output, and costs. Okay, so first we define the short run. And the short run is the period of time over which at least one of the inputs the firm is using is fixed. We assume that the firm is using two inputs: capital, that's physical, like machines, things like that, computers, physical things you use to produce, and labor, which is us, obviously. And what you do is you say, F stands for technology, so give me a specific amount of capital, give me a specific amount of labor, put it together with technology, and out comes a number, and that number stands for the amount of output we're going to produce. Okay? And in the short run, we assume that the amount of capital the firm is going to be able to use is constant. So I'm going to put a bar over it. Okay? So the idea there is, in order to produce, you have a fixed amount of capital, and over the short run, the amount of capital that you have to produce can't be changed. So suppose you're talking about a steel plant. Okay, so you're a steel company. So right now you have one factory, and you're using that factory to produce. Now you decide you want to get bigger. So you want to have more capital. But you start producing that factory, but you can't start producing output from that factory until the factory is totally done. And it takes years. It can take up to 5 years to finish that factory. And in the meantime, while you're waiting to build the new factory, you only have one factory, and that limits the amount of output you're going to be able to produce. So the amount of capital you have available to produce output is going to be fixed for those 5 years until the new plant is built, and then you have two factories. Okay, that's what we mean by fixed capital. And how long the short run is depends upon what industry you're in. If you're looking at a retail store, it could be the fixed capital is the size of the store, the square footage, and what's limiting your ability to change that is that you have a lease that you signed, and you can't break the lease. So in that case, if the lease is for a year, the short run for you would be a year. Okay? So the short run is the period of time over which at least one of the inputs, we assume capital, is fixed. That means that I can define quantity as changing only with the change in labor. So I'm going to define this as the total physical product of labor which is written total physical product of labor. Okay. In the short run, total cost is the sum of total cost is the sum of the total variable cost, which is the cost associated with labor, and total fixed cost, which is a constant, is associated with the cost of capital, where capital is fixed. So the variable cost is the wage of labor times labor, and the fixed cost is the price of capital times this fixed amount of capital. Okay? The long run is the period of time over which all variables are variable, that is, all inputs are variable. You can change the amount of capital and labor you have. The long run is really a planning horizon. So what we do is fix the amount of output you're going to produce and allow you to change the amount of capital and labor that you use to produce that fixed amount of output. What you're going to do is choose the amount of capital and labor that minimize the cost, of producing that amount of output. So we're only going to look at capital and labor that produce this amount of output, and then we're going to choose the minimum. In the long run, total cost equals total variable cost. And that equals the sum of the labor cost plus the cost of capital, which is the price of capital times now the changeable capital. Okay? Okay. So now the first thing we want to do is look at production and see how production influences costs. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the total physical product of labor. So again, the total physical product of labor is the amount of output that's produced when capital is fixed and the only thing that can change is labor. And in the short run, the total physical product of labor looks like this. Okay, this is in units of output. So if we're producing chairs, this is in units of chairs, this is in units of labor. Okay, the first thing that happens is the total physical product of labor increases at an increasing rate. That means as you hire another unit of labor, the extra output you get is positive and going up. That's because initially when you hire another unit of labor, it makes every other unit of labor more productive because units of labor, people can start helping each other, and over time, as you get more and more workers, you might start an assembly line which becomes more efficient. We know specialization makes you more efficient. So in the same amount of labor time, you get more output. That occurs until you get to L1. Then labor starts becoming a little less productive as you hire more and more labor, or the total physical product of labor is going to be increasing but at a decreasing rate. So now we only have so many tools, and as we hire more and more workers, the wait to use the next tools gets longer and longer and longer. So the amount of labor time that's spent non-productively just waiting to use the next tool goes up and up and up, and it goes higher and higher as you add another unit of labor. So labor becomes relatively less productive until L2, where actually the wait time is so long that output is actually falling. Okay? We can define the marginal physical product of labor It's the change in the total physical product for the change in labor, and we write it this way. So it's the rate at which the total physical product is changing. Okay? And the marginal physical product of labor looks like this. Where this is again in units of the good we're producing, let's say chairs. So initially, output is going up at a positive and increasing rate till L1 here. Then labor increases and output increases, this is positive, but at a decreasing rate until we go to L2. And now output is going down because the marginal physical product is negative. Okay. Now, what does this mean for costs? Okay. Well, as labor becomes relatively more productive, in order to produce another unit of output, you need a smaller and smaller increment of labor. So costs are going to go up, but costs are going to go up at a decreasing rate. That is, the extra increase in cost that you get is going to be smaller and smaller and smaller until you end up here, and then labor starts becoming relatively less productive. So now in order to produce a unit of output, it takes more and more labor, so your costs are going to go up at an increasing rate. Okay? The law of diminishing marginal returns says that in the short run, as you hire more and more labor, initially the marginal physical product of labor is going to be rising, but eventually the marginal physical product is going to be falling. We say that from L1 here, that's where diminishing returns sets in. So that's what the law of diminishing returns means. Or we should say diminishing marginal returns. It means as you hire more and more labor, eventually output increases, but at a decreasing rate. Okay? So now let's look at costs in the short run. Okay, look what's on this axis. On this axis is the quantity, this is of output. So if we're producing chairs, this is in units of chairs. This is dollars. This is going to be cost, and costs are going to look like this. Okay. Total fixed cost is a constant. That's what we said before. That's the cost associated with a fixed amount of capital. Variable cost, as we saw because of diminishing returns, is going to at first increase at a decreasing rate, and then diminishing returns sets in after this quantity of output. which is the quantity of output produced by the amount of labor for which diminishing return sets in. Then costs go up at an increasing rate. And total cost, remember, is the sum of fixed cost and variable cost. So you just take the variable cost and jump it up, and again, it increases at an decreasing rate, and then increases at an increasing rate. Okay. Now we can define the marginal cost. So marginal cost is the change in total cost for the change in the quantity of output, which, because the fixed cost doesn't change with output, also equals the total variable cost divided by the quantity. And it looks like this, where again this is quantity of output this is in dollars. So cost increase initially at a decreasing rate. That's where we have increasing returns. And then decreasing returns to labor sets in. Cost increase at an increasing rate. Marginal cost is going up. So when marginal cost is rising, it means the marginal physical product of labor is falling.